I have a very special guest today. Scott Wheeler from The Athletic is joining me, and I absolutely love your content. We got to talk a little bit at the Scouting Combine, and I'm just a huge fan, so thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anthony. I'm happy to make my debut here.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that the 2026 draft is a long ways away, but is there anybody that you kind of like are falling in love with prospect wise? Maybe it's in the top 10 or kind of past that number, but is there somebody that comes to mind?
Ryan Lin is the big one for me in this class in terms of just a favorite, a class pet for me, if you will. He, I think, has some special qualities in terms of how well-rounded he is, the way he thinks the game. He does virtually everything at a very, very high level at a very early age, which is pretty rare. It's particularly rare when you're a 5'11", 6 foot size defenseman. Typically, those guys have an offensive tilt, and offense is going to define their game. And while I think Lynn has all of those tools in terms of the way he sees the game, the way he moves pucks, the way he skates. Not an elite skater. I actually think that's the one area of his game that he probably needs to take a step here in is just sort of adding a little bit more of a sort of jump start, if you will, to his stride. But skates really well still. Um, and then on top of that, has some qualities that you typically don't see in 5'11", 6 foot D at that age, which are just the details defensively are high, high, high level for Ryan Lin already. Going back and getting pucks, shoulder checks, the way he navigates pressure, the way he breaks pucks out, the little plays under triangles, the little soft area plays to steer play up the ice, his stick and gaps defensively, his reads defensively, just checks a lot of boxes. I think we're talking about a premium D prospect, and coming out of a year in 2025 where not a single sub 6 foot defenseman was taken in the draft. I now think we've got a couple of guys in that mold who are not just going to get taken, but are potentially first round picks. And in Lynn's case, potentially a top 10 pick. I do think there's a chance that Lynn maybe ends up more in that range where Axine Sandin Pellikka and Denton Mateychuk went, sort of that 12 to 15 range on draft day. But I fully expect, based off what I've seen of Ryan to this point, he blew me away at U17 Worlds in Sarnia a full year ago. He was tremendous, one of the very best defensemen in the WHL last year, even as a 16-year-old. And I think he's just got another level and another sort of echelon to find this season. I think he's going to open up and be more ambitious offensively. And there's just a lot to get excited about with Lynn. So he'd probably be the guy that I really key in on. I fully expect that he'll be a top 10 guy on my list, all sort of start to finish in this draft class. That doesn't mean he necessarily goes top 10, but that's where I view him right now. And I can't imagine, based off what I've seen of him so far, that I'm going to change my mind on him as a player. I think he's a phenomenal player who impacts play in a lot of really important ways. So he's one, and then Xavier Villeneuve, I mean, I'm interested to see where those sort of defensemen, those smaller, if you will, defensemen go in this draft. Obviously, Villeneuve is a dynamic talent, but he's got to contend with the QMJHL sort of biases that exist out there. And he's even smaller than Lynn. Now, I did hear recently that he's up from 5'10" to 5'11", which, whether you think it matters or not, it does matter to NHL scouts, obviously. But he's another one. And then the other one who sort of really turned heads at U18 Worlds is Axel Olofsson, who is again 5'10", 5'11", but dynamic in quality and has some really impressive offensive elements. Olofsson isn't in the same tier as Ryan Lin and isn't even in the same tier as Xavier Villeneuve for me. I've got Villeneuve in the teens to start the year, and obviously Lin is in my top 5 to start the year. Olofsson, I think, is more of a second, third, fourth round pick type in this draft class, but I think he could be sort of a high second. You think of Samuel Girard, Olin Zellweger, some of those, Cole Hudson, some of those D that went sort of in that sort of early second round range. I'm not sure whether Olofsson is Hudson or Zellweger, frankly. But could he be more of like a Sam Girard guy who goes in that second round range? I think that's within reach. So I'm really interested to see what the conversation is around those three young D. There are tons of other players that I'm fascinated by in this class, but just because of the way that the draft went last year and really the way that it's gone in recent years, with how many sort of tall, rangy, physical, sort of that 6'4", 6'5" defenseman that everybody's after now, with the way that those guys are going and the way that it's going at the opposite end of the spectrum for the smaller D. I think it's just a really interesting conversation. We've seen players like Ville Heinola and Winnipeg struggle to break through. Matt took Rasmus Sandin a little while in Toronto. Adam Boqvist is still trying to figure it out. Victor Soderstrom with Utah and previously Phoenix doesn't even look like an NHL player anymore after he was a first-round pick. All of these sort of 5'11" D, I'll be interested to see what Axel Sandin Pellikka becomes and all of that. But they're all having a bit of a tough time these days. So that's just in and of itself, I think, an interesting conversation.
That was one of the absolute best answers I've ever had on this channel. You took a vague question and just spilled out so much information. So thank you so much for that. That was awesome. That's why you're one of the best in the business. That was sweet. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Frank Seravalli's tweet because he had talked about Keaton Verhoff kind of going in that number one range. I mean, number two, but he could push Gavin McKenna a little bit. Do you see Keaton Verhoff, catching up to McKenna in that race?
Don't, but I'm a smidge lower, at least have been a smidge lower over the course of the last year on Verhoff than NHL scouts are. I watched him play for the very first time live in Sarnia I guess it would have been last November. And that was sort of my introduction to Keaton Verhoff. I'd seen a little bit of him on tape in the early goings of that season with Victoria, but really U17s in Sarnia was my first trip to see him play, obviously. And ever since then, something about his feet just sort of was a little off-putting to me, kind of reminded me of Carter Yakimchuk in terms of just heavier feet. And I think it's just very, very, very hard now to be a true premium sort of superstar level defenseman, which I think is what you have to be if you're going to challenge Gavin McKenna for first overall. He's got to be Pietrangelo, right? Like you've got to be confident that you're getting that kind of a player. I know some people have sort of pointed to Aaron Ekblad maybe a little bit with him. I'm not sure I quite see that 1-to-1, despite the fact that they're both sort of 6'4" guys who are really mature physically. But that is just the feet. It's not that they're a major issue. He moves fine. But I would say they're average, maybe even slightly below average in terms of NHL defensemen these days. And so without some progress in the feet, and I'll be really interested to see how his feet look turning back for pucks and going back to get pucks and defending the rush at the college level and at college pace this year. All of the other tools are pretty sort of, they pop, if you will. They're pretty high end. So I mean, we're talking about a 6'4" defenseman. He's a summer birthday, so he's on the younger side. There's plenty of development runway ahead for him. That's appealing to teams, the ability to work with him and really turn him into something special. He's big, he's strong, he's been a captain, he's got some real poise with the puck on his stick. I do think he bobbles the puck a little bit sometimes, and his hands aren't quite as refined as some of the true premium offensive defensemen that we've seen come through the draft in recent years. But he can hammer the puck. He scored 20 goals in the WHL last year. You go down the list. He's a top defenseman. He's third on my list. This is a premium prospect. I just haven't seen. I don't think he's Matthew Schaeffer, for example. I'm lower on him than I was on Matthew Schaeffer heading into 2025. Matthew Schaeffer wasn't necessarily viewed as Matthew Schaeffer entering last year, though his Hlinka performance did really start to distinguish him. Schaeffer was better at Hlinka than Verhoff was at Hlinka. Verhoff was also very, very, very good for Canada at U18 Worlds in Texas in the spring, though. So it's going to be an interest. I think we're going to be having the Schaeffer-Verhoff conversation throughout this year. But with Schaeffer, the skating was just world class, like this one of one skater as far as I'm concerned in that draft class. And there were some very good skaters in the 2025 class, or one of these premium D prospects led by Verhoff has a huge year in college hockey. That's where the position might come into it for McKenna. Maybe McKenna gets injured. Maybe he doesn't pop like Fantilli and Celebrini did. I think that's possible. Um, but I still think it's going to be McKenna at the end of the day. I'd be pretty surprised if it's not Gavin.
So I wanted to ask, I mean, there's a lot of questions that I wanted to ask after that, but Verhoff, Matthew Schaeffer, and Landon Dupont, is there like a clear winner there in your mind, prospect wise, but who you kind of would take? I know you said Schaefer over Verhoff, but Landon Dupont over Schaefer, is there a clear winner?
Dupont's a tricky one because we don't know what his finish line is in the same way that we start to have a sense of what Matthew Schaeffer is going to be in the NHL. I think the Heiskanen comp that's been used for Schaeffer is an appropriate one. I think he's going to become that level of player, and with his skating is going to be an excellent transition two-way defenseman in the NHL and one of the 10 or 15 better D in the league in the prime of his career. I don't know whether he's ever going to have the offense to get to the level that a Cale Makar or a Quinn Hughes have. In fact, I would argue that he doesn't have that in him and won't get there. But could he be that level below the sort of the Charlie McAvoy tier of defensemen in the league, or the Miro Heiskanen tier of defensemen in the league? I think that's a reasonable projection for Matthew Schaeffer. I'm not sure that I'm quite there on Verhoff, and certainly in Dupont, he's going to have to be in order to challenge a Schaeffer. He's going to have to be, because of his size, he has to be Adam Fox or Cale Makar or Quinn Hughes, right? Like the offense is going to have to be so high end, and the defense is still going to have to be very high end. The difference between those players and the Erik Karlssons or the Lane Hutsons, and I'm talking about a Quinn Hughes or a Cale Makar, is that they also defend at among the highest levels in the league as well, right? So on top of having that sort of 70, 80 point offense that a Hudson or an Erik Karlsson have, and Dupont's if Dupont's Lane Hudson or some sort of high end offensive type who's good defensively but not a 25, 30 minute a night defensive guy, then it's going to be tough for him at that size to make the kind of impact that I think a Schaefer or a Heiskanen is capable of making, right? So it's going to be an interesting conversation with Dupont. I haven't necessarily, despite his brilliant statistics in the WHL last year, and despite the way that people talk about him, and I've spoken to people all the way back to minor hockey for some of the stories that I've done on Dupont already, and the feature that I did on him last year, and they talk about him as like his big believers believe that Landon can become that sort of Makar Hughes Hall of Fame level, Conn Smythe type, Norris Trophy type defenseman. I'm not sure I'm there on Landon. I've seen Landon blend in games and not really be the guy, not really be the driver in games. So he's going to have to elevate, I think, over the next year and a half in order to put himself in that kind of a conversation. But I don't think at this point we're saying that Landon Dupont is the for sure first overall pick in 2027. Like I think there's absolutely a world where Landon Dupont is picked seventh or eighth overall, for example. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting conversation. Teams really, unless they believe in that 5'11" type to become a Makar or a Quinn Hughes, teams are going to have a tough time taking that player first or second overall, right? So I don't think that conversation is going to go away from Dupont unless he just makes it go away with his play and he does things in the WHL this year and potentially college hockey next year. We'll see what decision he makes, but unless he just does things that we've never seen, it's going to be tough for him. I mean, Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes didn't go first overall, right? Now they would in a redraft, but they were sort of more in, obviously Cale third overall and then Hughes seventh overall. So I think that's a potential sort of range for Dupont. He could go first overall, but I wouldn't rule out him going maybe 3 or 4 spots lower than that kind of thing.
Yeah, then talking about Quinn Hughes going seventh, Boquist went eighth to the Blackhawks, which that's just a franchise changer. So it's always interesting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Gavin
And
McKenna.
Philip Zadina went sixth, right?
Yeah, that is true. And just the amount of upside that he had in that class, I remember everybody talking about how much upside he had. But Gavin McKenna, I wanted to talk about, is he, in your opinion, in the same tier as like Bedard and Celebrini at their same time?
I think because he's a winger, it's tough to put him in that tier. Centers are just they just have more of an opportunity to make an impact on a game. They're more involved in what's going on the ice. Whether you like it or not, they're just viewed differently. Even in the NHL today, I think Leon Draisaitl and Nathan McKinnon and Connor McDavid are just viewed differently than David Pastrnak and Kirill Kaprizov. As great as Pastrnak and Kaprizov are, and Kucherov's a Hall of Famer, and Kucherov's been one of the best players in the world for the length of his career, basically. And I think Nikita Kucherov should have won one of those two Conn Smythes when they won. But it's just tough for those guys to be viewed as the true number one, number two, number three players in the league. You look back on lists. Kucherov was always fourth or fifth on the TSN's top 50 players rankings or that kind of a thing, right? Like it's always the McKinnons and the McDavids. It's the centers that drive that conversation. I think that's going to be true as the next generation comes through, and it's Bedard and it's Fantilli and it's Wyatt Johnston and it's Celebrini. I think those centers are just going to be viewed a little bit differently than the Demidovs, than the Michkovs, than the McKennas. It's just hard. Even Patrick Kane was always sort of viewed as an equal to Jonathan Toews, even though for a stretch of his career, there was an easy argument to be made that Patrick Kane was the most talented player in the world, right? But it's the Patrice Bergerons, it's the Toews that get more of the love for the actual impact that they have on the ice. And I think that's when we talk about Celebrini in particular, we'll see what Bedard ends up looking like. I think Bedard's a brilliant, brilliant talent, and I think we haven't even seen a fraction of the impact that Connor Bedard's going to have. I think he's going to become that Patrick Kane level player for them. But I truly believe that Celebrini is going to be the Jonathan Toews, the Patrice Bergeron, that true number one two-way center. And it'll be an interesting conversation. If Gavin McKenna is Pastrnak, or I'll flip the question back to you maybe here a little bit, but if Gavin McKenna is Pastrnak or Kucherov or Kaprizov and Celebrini is Patrice Bergeron, somewhere between Sidney Crosby and Patrice Bergeron. I don't think anybody expects him to be Sidney Crosby, but a budget version of that. Are you taking that player, or are you taking the McKenna, the sort of the Kucherov, the Pastrnak? I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely taking Sidney Crosby, Patrice Bergeron. It's just like I think that's why Ivan Demidov fell in that draft, and I think, like you said, to your point, Michkov fell to 7, which I still am shocked. I mean, that was a little bit different than Demidov, but I'm still shocked Demidov fell to 5. I mean,
Agreed.
in a redraft, he wouldn't be. Stephen Ellis just had him as his number 2 prospect in the entire NHL. Matthew Schaeffer was 1, so definitely check out that article because it's awesome. But yeah, I think with Gavin McKenna, the whole thing is he has said that Patrick Kane was his player comp for himself. Like he grew up watching him. It's a little bit different than what Celebrini was talking about with Sidney Crosby. I wanted to get your opinion on Ivar Stenberg and some of the other Swedish prospects that have come out in recent years, like Leo Carlson and Anton Frandell. Can you kind of like tell me what you think Ivar Stenberg, like rank wise, would be in between those 3?
Well, it's a very good question. He's a better prospect at this age than Frandell. Frandell's 3 with a bullet in that group for me. Like that's not a difficult decision. I know you're coming at it from as a Blackhawks sort of Blackhawks adjacent. So I'm sorry to
I agree.
I agree. Give you that news, but no, Frandell. I think Stenberg is closer to Leo than he is to Frandell. I wasn't and have not to this point been quite as high on Leo Carlson as people in hockey, but I'm putting together my prospect tiers, which is an annual project that I do at The Athletic, where I start by building buckets and placing prospects into buckets, a lot like our player tiers that Dom does. I use the same tiers as him. It's sort of a joint project that Dom and I are now doing together. And I've just said, but just to go back a little bit, and I'll get to your question. I send the prospect tiers out to people, to scouts, to 15 to 20 scouts, and I ask them to move guys around and let them sort of shape the list. So it's less my list, more theirs. And it's trying to build a consensus on where these players project, what type of player they project into. And 2 years running, when I've done prospect tiers, I've placed Leo Carlson at sort of the top of the all-star tier for me, which is the third tier that we use, sort of a high-end all-star type projection. And each year they've come back to me that the tiers above all-star are sort of the MVP, so top 10 player in the world, and then franchise, so sort of top 30, 35 player in the world, and then all-star is sort of top 60 player in the world. I've always viewed him as more of an all-star than a franchise type. Every year the feedback from scouts has been this guy's a low-end franchise type. So they think that Leo Carlson can become somewhere between the 20th and 30th best player in the world. And that is high praise. That is a point per game, first line center all day long. I haven't quite been able to get there. I just don't think he plays with all that much jam. He's obviously lengthy, and he's got skill, and he's got poise, and he's going to be a very productive top of the lineup player in the NHL. That's not what I'm sort of trying to get at here. But he doesn't, to use the Ducks for an example, I don't think he has that sort of that identity that a Ryan Getzlaf had for them, or that identity that a Corey Perry had for them. I'm not sure he's your number one player on a Stanley Cup winning team kind of thing. But there are people who believe he is that. And it's still early in conversations with people on Stenberg. I think people view Stenberg as a premium winger prospect. Stenberg compares himself to Tim Stützle, and I can kind of see a path to him being Tim Stützle. If he is Tim Stützle, then and let's say Carlson is the player that people think he can become, then they're probably comparable. I think Stützle's what, a 70, 80, 90 point player in the league. If people clearly believe that Carlson can get to that level. I'm not sure on Carlson. I do think that Stenberg can get there, though. I'm a big fan of Ivar. He is the thing about Ivar is, on top of the one-timer on the power play and the hands and the playmaking and all of the offensive elements, he is very, very strong on pucks. I think it's an extremely underrated quality in Ivar early on. One of the things that impresses me most about Stenberg's game is his wall play, his ability to protect with one hand on his stick, his ability to get up and under sticks and steal pucks off of people along the wall. He's a really sneaky, strong kid, a lot like Stützle is in some ways. I would probably grade Stenberg and Carlson as equal prospects at this stage, and then have Frundell a little bit lower. But I think there's a world where Stenberg, if Carlson doesn't meet his potential and just becomes, let's say, a 65 point player or 65 to 70 point player, I think there's a world where Stenberg's potentially a notch above that. He's the second best prospect in this draft for me. And I have him, to start the year at least, I have him ahead of Verhoff.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Like, I think Stenberg is definitely one of the best players in this draft. I would have him like 3 teetering 2, but Vigo Bjork actually was the top scorer on the J20 team. I think he had 74 points in 42 games, and that was just incredible. I know Anton Frundell had 7 points in 10 games. So can you tell me a little bit about him? And also, like you said, with Villanueva. So Bjork actually just grew from 5'9" to 5'10". So I know that's big to get a double digits. So what are your thoughts on Vigo?
Vigo's going to be a talking point in this draft throughout the year because he's a center in a class that has, after Tynan Lawrence, might not have a true center go in the top 10. Ryan Rubrick is listed as a center, but has played mostly wing in the OHL. I'll be interested to see whether Rubrick actually plays center this year. And the rest of the top of the draft, Belkets, Novotny, Stenberg, who I mentioned, obviously. The rest of the top of the draft are wingers. Bjork, whether he's a center, I think in and of itself will be an interesting conversation. He's a committed player. He has played center his whole life. He wants to be a center. My colleague Corey Pronman raised on our podcast, so I'll give him the credit for this. This isn't my connection, but my colleague Corey Pronman raised the Marco Rossi conversation to me on our podcast a couple of weeks ago. Sort of, Rossi went right around 10 to, I believe he went 9th to Minnesota. Rossi is now a 60-point player in the league, and yet the Minnesota Wild are hesitant to commit to him because they don't know whether you can win with a 60-point second line center who's 5'10" and sort of plays that style. I think there are some parallels between Bjork and Rossi. The thing I would say there is that Bjork, obviously with the J20 and the J18 scoring record, Bjork has more shine and gloss to his statistical profile at this stage than Marco Rossi did in his draft year. If you remember, Marco's real breakout was actually his draft year. He had that 120-point season with the Ottawa 67s. The year prior to that in the OHL, Rossi was a very good player on a very deep Ottawa 67s team, but he wasn't setting records and doing the things that we saw Vigo do. The challenge for Bjork's going to be on the World Junior team. You always get shine from that. His coach, actually, the coach Magnus Havlid with the World Junior team told me that he's going to be on the team. So they're planning for that. He's going to, if he's at the J20 level, he's going to do silly things a lot like Lucas Raymond and Alexander Holtz and some of the top Swedes have done in recent years. I think he's got that kind of production in him. The test for him, though, the litmus test for Bjork is going to be to prove to NHL scouts that he can do it with Djurgården at the pro level this year. If he doesn't do that, if he doesn't show well at the pro level, which I think is possible, I think there's a chance he's a late first round pick because of the size rather than a sort of 10 to 15 pick, which is kind of where I envision him in this class, which is similar to where obviously Marco Rossi went. He's going to be an interesting one. I think the fact that he's a center helps him. The fact that he's 5'10" doesn't. And I don't know whether even what he's accomplished to date will be enough. He's a really crafty, smart player. I love watching him play. He's without question a top player when he plays against his age group. The question is always with those kids is sort of what are they going to look like in the NHL? And I think the Rossi conversation is an interesting one because I think teams will think about him the way that they thought about Marco. And ultimately, Marco probably goes about where he went. He went 9th. He probably goes about there in a redraft. But the Wild still aren't sure what to do with him. And I think that is telling of the fact that teams aren't necessarily going to know what to do with Vigo Bjork. And he's going to have to be like a true high-end skill guy. And he's going to have to show that this year in order to really sell them on him as a sort of front half of the first round pick. When I see public lists, for example, that have him 5th or 6th, I think that's getting carried away, as talented as he is.
Yeah, definitely the sizes
and his
translatability.
Yeah, and I'm coming from a place, I had Marco Rossi like 4th or 5th on my list that year and would say today as the evaluator that I am today that I was too high on Rossi. So there's been a little bit of a course correction for me on some of these guys. I'm still not afraid to really believe in true skill guys. But I was also probably too high. I had Zach Benson in the top 10 on my list. I'm not sure Zach Benson was a top 10 pick at the end of the day. Like it's hard, man, in the NHL, unless you're the ultra competitive type, like a Travis Konechny, for example, or unless you're just that sort of superstar level, high end skill guy. And even then, like Cole Caulfield filled the net his whole life and has become a very good NHL player, but Cole Caulfield is still a limited player in some ways, right? So it's an interesting time we're in right now. Obviously Crosby's 5'11", but Crosby's a little bit of a different animal. No, Kaprizov's sort of in that range. Braden Point, obviously, like there are players who do it. But you really have to sell teams that you can be that guy.
Yeah, the benchmark of skill in the NHL is so close together that like B and C game really matters. And that's why Brady Martin went 5th. And there's time and time again. And it is interesting. I'm definitely more of a skill guy. When I watch players with a ton of skill, I raise them on my rankings, and I probably shouldn't based on historical data. But I wanted to get your opinion on Tynan Lawrence because he's one of my favorite players in this class. I just think what he does at Muskegon, he's a winning player. So can I get your opinion on him?
Yeah, I agree. I think winning player is the perfect description for Lawrence. I think he will really benefit in this class by being the only premium center in this class. He's going to be a top six center in the NHL. I know that even already, just based off of what I've seen from him in the USHL playoffs last year, in the USHL regular season last year. That is a very hard, I don't think people realize how hard the USHL is to produce in as a young player. Harder, certainly, than the three junior leagues north of the border. It's just a lower scoring league. And because it's a lower scoring league, I'm always impressed when a player like Lawrence is the best player on his team and really drives a team at an early age, which he did last year as a 16-year-old. I don't know whether he's a truly true, like, I don't know whether he'll be a first line center in the NHL. I wonder a little bit about like a player like Wyatt Johnston. Wyatt Johnston's probably a first line center in the NHL, but I think there's a reasonable conversation to be had that Wyatt and Rupi Hintz are interchangeable. And there's also probably a reasonable conversation to be had, as great as Dallas has been, as to whether you can win with Rupi Hintz and Wyatt Johnston as your top two centers, or whether you in today's game you need the Draisaitl, you need the McKinnon, you need that sort of premium guy. What Steven Stamkos was for a little bit, although Steven kind of became a winger for the Lightning. So that's certainly the Lightning have proven that you can win with Stamkos and point level talents, and you don't necessarily need that transcendent sort of top 3 or 4 or 5 scorer in the league. I do think people got a little bit carried away by what the St. Louis Blues did, and that it's going to be very hard moving forward to repeat winning a championship with a team that was built like the St. Louis Blues were built. It's just so hard now without the premium guys. And I think there's a reason that the core that exists in Florida has been so dominant, and it's really driven by the top end talent there, and Barkov and Tkachuk and Reinhart, and what Forsling has become for them and all of that. But it's Lawrence is going to be an interesting one because he's that 6'1" center who has all of the tools. He can shoot the puck. He can play with speed. He can slow the game down. He works. He's competitive. Teams are high on him early, and I don't think that's going to fade. I don't think he's going to lose that shine. The USHL is going to be a bit of a weaker league this year, and I expect that his numbers could really pop there as well. So. I think there's a chance that Muskegon goes back to back as well, and he'll get that winning pedigree that teams care about. So he's there's no question. Like, Lawrence is a top 3, 4, or 5 pick in this draft class. I wouldn't even be shocked if he went second overall, for example, ahead of a player like a Stenberg or a Verhoff if he has a really strong year. So he's right in that mix at the top of this group.
For the St. Louis Blues championship, to me, I always thought that was a fluke. And St. Louis had done that because they did the same thing with the Cardinals. Not really like a fluke, but it was a one-off season where it might be a little hard to repeat that, like you said. I wanted to talk a little bit about like Adam Valentilli and his or sorry, Adam Valentini, not yeah. So Adam Valentini and his decision to go to Michigan. Can you talk
Yeah.
like when that happened, what was your reaction?
I was a little surprised. I think some of these kids are going to realize that they've jumped the gun. There have been a lot of players who've obviously made the decision to make an earlier jump than they were planning to college hockey. There are other players who obviously weren't even considering college hockey who've also now made that jump, that it's available to them. I'm really interested to see how some of the really, really young players that have made that decision fare in college hockey. And I think it's particularly going to be interesting at the University of Michigan, where they've brought in the largest recruitment class. I don't know whether it's the best recruitment class, but in terms of sheer number of freshmen that they're inserting into their lineup, it's certainly the largest. There are a number of players going to Michigan this year that I think could have a difficult time. It's hard to win in college hockey with a young team and to be competitive in college hockey. The Big Ten is now the toughest conference in college hockey as well. And I think they're going to have some tough nights early on this season as all of those guys sort of figure out how to play their role. I'm not talking about a player like a Malcolm Spence, who I think is ready for that kind of hockey. I'm thinking more about Henry Muse, about Adam Valentini. Those guys I think are in for a bit of a rude awakening, if you will. So it's going to be interesting. I also wonder whether they're going to leave Jack Ivankovic out to dry a little bit there. They do have a ton of talent though, and there are some returning players. TJ Hughes is returning there and is an excellent college hockey center. Michael Hage is obviously back as a sophomore. They've got some impact guys there. They're going to score some goals. They're going to be a very entertaining team to watch. I think the world of Nar as a head coach, and I think he's one of the brighter offensive minds in hockey right now. So there's good things happening at Michigan. This isn't meant to be me shitting on Michigan, but I think guys like Valentini could find it a little tough. And I think the better choice for Valentini would have been for his development would have been to play in Kitchener for a year or two. Kitchener's obviously vying to host the Memorial Cup. I'm not saying that he had to stick around for 2 years to be a part of that process, but I think 1 year could have benefited him. I don't think what he showed in Chicago last year screamed that he was ready to be an impact player in college hockey. I've got a lot of time for him as a player. He works hard. He's got active feet. He sort of buzzes around the ice. He's got good playmaking instincts. He's a natural center. There's appeal to Adam Valentini and his profile, but I think he would have been better prepared for success had he returned for 1 more year. And I do wonder if some guys end up sort of regretting the decision that they've made. And again, I'm not talking about a Cole Reshny, for example, who I think is ready for that, but some of the younger players with less of a proven track record, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't prove it at every level before they advance to the next. And that means being a dominant player in the OHL or in the USHL before you make that jump, I think is the right advice for some of these kids.
Yeah, we've seen it time and time again when you jump to the NCAA, it kind of hurts your draft stock. I think we saw that with Logan Hensler last year going to Wisconsin, and I'm a big Logan Hensler fan. I think that it did hurt his draft stock. I wanted to actually talk to you
And
about
a player like
okay,
Cullen Potter, who obviously
yeah.
became a first round pick taking that path, Cullen could fly, right? Like Cullen had this one element that you knew because of the skating that he was going to be able to make plays at that level. And it was still challenging in many ways for Cullen Potter over the course of the season. But there just isn't that one element that says this kid can use this tool to impact games consistently. I think Adam Valentini is an excellent hockey player, and I have him rated as a late first round pick. But it's yeah, I think there will be some tough nights for him.
Yeah, and to your point, when I like at the scouting combine, I was actually very impressed by Colin Potter's upper body because it did seem more filled out. And obviously, when you're going into the NCAA schedule, you're working out a lot more, not really losing as many calories because you're not playing as many games. But with Adam Valentini, I heard that I think Central Scouting had him listed at 5'9" for the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, which it was 5'9" and a quarter, but he was listed on 5'11" on some of these other scouting departments. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. I would like to see where he is listed, but going from 5'9" or 5'11" to 5'9" on a listing that can impact your draft stock if he doesn't continue to grow. I did want to talk to you about Artem Levshunov, Sam Renzel, and two other players. Vaslav Nestrasil and Mason West. So can you tell me a little bit about the Blackhawks prospect pool and like those four players?
Yeah, they took an interesting path in this year's draft, obviously. They've really prioritized such a clear vision in their amateur scouting department over the last several years, right? They up front, they've prioritized for years now. They've prioritized skills and especially speed. They've got the fastest, they may not have the best they may not have at different points of that had the best prospect pool in the league, but they've had an upper echelon prospect pool in the league. And what they have had is certainly the fastest group of forward prospects in the league. Oliver Moore is obviously a world-class skater. Frank Nazar is a world-class skater, but it wasn't just them. Kantsarov can fly. Nick Lardis can fly. You go down the list. Paul Ludwinski, who they took, can absolutely fly. Samuel Savoy, who they took, is a great skater. Ryan Green is a great skater. Like skating has been the priority up front. They want to build a fast group of forwards up front. Part of the emphasis that they've put on skating, and I don't think it was by design that they were taking smaller players, but part of the byproduct of that, just because some of the really fast players in those draft classes were on the smaller side has been that their prospect pool has skewed smaller. They've taken some really great skaters who are bigger. Jack Pridham is an excellent skater and is a little bit sort of he's not sub 6 foot, for example. So they've done. AJ Spellacy is obviously a mutant as an athlete, but skating, it was all about skating, 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 skating. And this year they clearly tried to add and inject more size into the pool, and they did that through Nestrasil, through Frundell. Obviously, Sasha Boisvert is a little bit on the bigger side, but Sasha also he's pretty lean. He was certainly in his draft year, he was a pretty lean kid. And he started to add muscle, I know now, but West is huge and Nestrasil is huge and Frundell is a big, thick kid as well. So they've tried to inject a little bit of a different look into their system. I think that came maybe at the expense of a little bit of value at the draft with where they took some of those kids. But I still understand why they made those selections. And I think they were smart to make those selections because it was important that they add a bit of a different element into the pool. West is a complete wild card. I have no idea what he's going to become. Is he Dean Letourneau, for example, who really struggled in college hockey last year? Or is he what I'm sure they're hoping he is, which is closer to Tage Thompson and that truly sort of impact, high skill big man? He doesn't have a ton of jam, and neither did Letourneau, but I think he has more of it than Letourneau has. I don't think that. I know he has more of it than Letourneau has. Letourneau, one of the big knocks on him was that he was kind of soft. That isn't a question, or at least that isn't a declaration in the same way for Mason West. People do want to see West use his body and become more of a power forward type, and I think he'll become that. Obviously, playing football, I'm sure he's not shy of contact. So that part of it is just interesting. Like, I just think Mason West is interesting. I'm not sure what he becomes. I think it's going to be years before we find that out. But they took a similar gamble with Sam Rinzel, and Sam was extremely raw. There was a lot of uncertainty in where his sort of ceiling and floor were. There was probably a wider gap than most first round picks for Sam Rinzel in terms of where his ceiling could be and where he might bottom out as well if things didn't go well for him as he made the jump. And then Sam obviously took off in college hockey at the University of Minnesota and has become not just a good prospect, but a legit potential stud prospect alongside Gleb Shunov. And I've even read on Twitter people in Chicago talking about them as equals, which I'm not sure I'm quite there. I think Artie has a ton of untapped potential still. But that speaks to the development of Rinzel, right? And Nestrasil's an interesting one. I don't think Nestrasil's ever going to play super high in a lineup. But if he's a third line winger who is really strong defensively and plays with some pace and can score 20 goals at that size, that's still a very valuable player and could be particularly valuable to the Blackhawks if their top six has Connor Bedard in it and Frank Nazar in it. And I don't think Oliver Moore is a top six guy. I think he's probably sort of battling with Sasha Boisvert for a third line job eventually. But you get my drift. Let's say one of Kantsarov and Lardis makes it. I don't think there's enough room for both of Kantsarov and Lardis to make it. But let's say one of them becomes a scorer, complementary scoring winger in the NHL. Suddenly with Nazar and Bedard, you're skewing smaller. So I think that's where Boisvert and potentially West and Nestrasil comes in. I think Nestrasil is a safer bet. He just has great sort of defensive habits. I think he'll be a really good checking third line player who can chip in offensively. And every team needs those guys. Like, those guys make $4.5 million bucks in the NHL nowadays, right? So that's what I think you're building towards with Nestrasil. Whereas with West, there's just such a wider range of potential outcomes.
Yeah, and another one is he sticks and plays football. That John Gruden interview kind of scared me about how many schools are going to be watching that, because John Gruden is obviously a legend over there. But I wanted to ask about Kevin Korchinski and what you kind of think about him and where you see him fitting into the D-corps for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, Korchinski's a tricky one. The talent has always been there. He's always had some playmaking ability and elements and the ability to jump into the rush and in junior hockey, he was kind of a bit of a rover type. Like it when he played in Seattle, he was all over the offensive zone. He was swinging below the goal line. He was trying to make things happen. And he kind of reminded me of Thomas Harley for a little bit there, where Harley wasn't in junior the player that he has become now. Thomas Harley was a pretty erratic player. He was all over the ice. He was trying to make things happen. He came with some criticisms because of that. Korchinski kind of had a little bit of that. Harley always was a thicker kid, though. Korchinski was a pretty rangy kid, and I think there was the belief that because Harley was going to get the physical development, that Harley had a real path to sort of put it all together. With Korchinski, because of the emergence of Sam Rinzel, and because Artie, as a second overall pick, is just going to get opportunities to play the power play and to be a stud, and they're going to give him every opportunity to succeed. Because Rinzel has now emerged, I just wonder whether there's a path for Korchinski. I think Korchinski can still become a good defenseman in Chicago, but is he going to become the best version of himself in Chicago? I'm not sure that that's now available to him. I think the best version of Kevin Korchinski has to have him running your power play. Now, that doesn't mean he's a PP1 guy, but I think Kevin Korchinski has to be a PP2 guy in order to realize his potential. And I just don't think that he's going to ever leapfrog Artie or Sam to play that kind of a role. So it puts him in a bit of a bind. I almost feel bad for him. He got jobbed by the pandemic. He got jobbed by having to play in the NHL at 18. There have just been things that, frankly, are completely out of Kevin Korchinski's control that have happened in his young career that I think have impacted him in a negative way. So I'm just interested now to see what happens with Korchinski. I still think he's an important piece of the puzzle for them. But you've also got these different player types that are coming, right? Like you've got Nolan Allen, you've got Ethan Del Mastro, you've got guys who sort of fit that third pairing role better than a Kevin Korchinski fits it. At least in the eyes of what NHL teams want their blue lines to look like, and the need to have penalty killers and all of that. Like Allen is just that type of player for you, and Del Mastro could be that type of player for you, right? And you've got Crevier and all these other guys, and as a result, I just think it puts like what if Korchinski's just a 5-on-5 guy for them? How good of a player can he realistically become if he's just a 5-on-5 D for them, right? So I just don't know whether he'll ever reach his potential in Chicago. And I wonder whether he ends up getting, like, whether there's a change of scenery swap to make with him with another organization for another type of player kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Reichel would also be in that discussion as well. I wanted to put you in like the GM seat of picking between the Sharks and the Blackhawks. You can take one of those GM seats and kind of just who you kind of think would have a stronger path to contention and maybe like a contender for a very long time.
I think the Sharks have a better path. I think that the idea of the trio of Celebrini, Will Smith, and Michael Misa and what that could look like, the Blackhawks just don't have that up front. Boisvert, excellent prospect. West, good prospect. Nestersil, good prospect. Frank Nazar has become a very, very high-end talent. But Frank Nazar and Connor Bedard and Anton Frendel, let's say those are your three core forwards. If your three core forwards are Bedard, Frendel, and Nazar, I just think that Celebrini, Smith, and Misa, if Misa hits, that threesome is a stronger threesome. Now, then you get into Sam Dickinson versus Artie, which I think is a conversation that I would listen to an argument either way on. I think the consensus right now would actually maybe favor Sam Dickinson. I think Sam benefits, though, from having played junior last year. Had Artie gone back to college hockey and been one of the best defensemen in college hockey again, I actually think I'm not sure it would have been better for his development, but the perception of him as a player would be more favorable now just because he did have some ups and downs in the AHL last year. But I think Artie's a stud, and I'm a big fan. I just love Artie as a kid too, so I'm pulling for him. It's going to be interesting though. I think those guys are probably equal. I think the depth on the blue line in Chicago in terms of what's behind Sam Dickinson in San Jose is not nearly as strong as Sam Rinzel and Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen and Ethan Del Mastro and what's currently behind Artie in Chicago. So I think that the depth on defense in Chicago is better. There's a little bit more speed in Chicago, but I just think the core is what drives success ultimately in the NHL. And I just don't think that Bedard and Frendel and Nazar is the same level of core as what Celebrini and Smith and uh, Misa could become. Even Knight versus Askarov is interesting, right? Like if you start to pick apart the young players within each organization, I think it's interesting. There's some really unique sort of boomer bust types in the Sharks pool that if they bust, I could see a path where the Blackhawks end up with the better group of young talent in the NHL. Igor Chernyshov, who had an excellent year last year for Saginaw, playing with Michael Misa in Saginaw, has people excited about his talent and the potential for this big 6'2", 6'3" winger who can score goals to be a really nice complementary scorer for the Sharks. Quinton Musty has obviously been a top player at the OHL level. Luca Cagnoni has been a top player in the WHL and now the AHL. But there's risk in Cagnoni. There's risk in Chernyshov. There's a ton of risk that Quinton Musty doesn't become anything. And because of that, I do think there's a little bit more of a boomer bust element in some of the non-Celebrini, non-Will Smith, non-Michael Misa, non-Sam Dickinson players within the Sharks organization versus I think there's a lot of projection in Oliver Moore and in Sacha Boisvert and Ryan. Like they're all just good hockey players, right? They're going to play. So that's interesting. I think the Blackhawks group is maybe a little bit more projectable after the big names, but I think the big names carry you ultimately, and the big names at this stage, I think the big names in San Jose have a higher ceiling together.
And just I wanted to ask about Celebrini versus Bedard. Like, if you could, who would you take?
Oh yeah, this is a question that's not going away. I'm constantly thinking about it. I will say that in my Prospecteers project, which hasn't come out yet, that scouts slightly, and it's very slightly, scouts slightly favored Celebrini at the moment. I do think that Celebrini just has a lot of shine coming out of his strong rookie year, a lot like Bedard did coming out of his rookie year. It'll be on Celebrini to repeat it this year. I think because Celebrini is viewed as that sort of anchor two-way center, that he's always going to maybe get a little bit more love than Bedard. But I think Bedard's going to surprise some people in the next year or two. I think there's a breakout coming, and I think once he gets some talent around him, we're going to see him score 40 to 50 goals a year and 90 points a season. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets to 100 or 110 at some point in his career. I'm not sure Bedard's going to be that every year. Like I could see him have 70 one year and 95 the next year, and that kind of those sort of ebbs and flows that every player has. And that even Austin Matthews here in Toronto, where I am, obviously had last year after a 69 goal season this season prior, right? So there's going to be highs and lows for both players. The belief seems to be that Celebrini's level is going to be consistently higher than Bedard's. And that Celebrini is a more natural center and number one center at that than Bedard. But I think Bedard's been I've tweeted this several times in the last few months, but I think Bedard's one of the most underrated and disrespected players in the league at the moment. So I still have very, very high expectations that Bedard's going to become one of the premium offensive players in the world. I think it's only a matter of time. I think he's going to have a bigger year this year. But Celebrini is viewed right now, and I understand why he's viewed the way he is. Celebrini is viewed right now at a very, very high regard.
Yeah, it's like whoever you surround them with, I think is going to decide how many point totals it is and the upside that they both get. But I do like that answer. There's only two more questions. One was, do you think Michael Misa and Matthew Schaeffer will make the NHL rosters this year?
If I were either of those teams, I would lean against it. Now, if you want to try them out for a few games in the NHL to start the year, I don't think there's much risk in doing that. Schaeffer can skate at the NHL level. He will get by. Schaeffer could play in the NHL next year and be fine, I think. But that's rare. That's not just rare. That's almost unheard of nowadays to see an 18-year-old defenseman playing in the league. Even first overall picks Rasmus Dahlin, obviously a bit of an exception, but Owen Power went back. Um, all of these guys, they go back. Makar went back, you name it. Sometimes for 2 years, obviously. Jake Sanderson went back for 2 years. Um, I'm always of the opinion with defensemen, take your time. I know there's pressure when it's a first overall pick to sell tickets and to get them into the building and to get them into your organization. And Schaefer's an unbelievable kid, so he's always a positive in the room and all of that. And he can skate, and he's just man, he can skate, right? So that part is interesting. I think because he's not just 18, he's going to be a young 18. He's going to have just turned 18 because of that birthday of his, and because of all the games he missed last year due to mono and then the collarbone. I don't think there's harm in him playing in Erie this year and playing in the OHL this year and being, if not the captain of the World Junior team, then wearing a letter with the World Junior team. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing for Matthew Schaeffer to do. Misa is an interesting one because Misa was the best player in the OHL last year, or one of the 3 or 4 best players in the OHL last year. And yet I do think Misa still has some development to do in the OHL. And I think we saw it in the playoffs last year, for example, in the OHL, where he wasn't at his best. I just came a few weeks ago now, from watching him at the World Junior Summer Showcase in Minneapolis, where I thought he blended in and didn't look like a dominant sort of put me in the NHL player as well. So I think Misa's a phenomenal player, and I was very high on him in his draft year and all of that. But I don't think he screams, I have to be in the NHL this year. And if he goes back to Saginaw, he's with an organization that is bringing in a pretty interesting group of players this year. And even if they traded him, for example, to more of a contending team, and he goes about it that way, I don't know what the best route is necessarily for Misa, but I'm not convinced, I'll say, that he's NHL ready.
And can I get your Calder vote? Like, if you have one guy that you think could win the Calder next year, who is your pick?
Yeah, it's not going to be like, unless we see Schaefer and Misa, it's not going to be a sexy class. Uh, Certainly, it's not going to have Bedard, Celebrini, Lane Hudson, some of the classes that we've had the last couple of years. Matvei Michkov, Brock Faber was tremendous. I don't think we're going to have a class that strong. And the one thing that you need to win the Calder is offense and power play time. So when I've started to put together, I do a Calder list every year before the season. I've just started to sort of think about it this year. The one player, frankly, that I keep coming back to is actually Zane Parekh, who I'm not even convinced will play the full year in the NHL. But I think if Zane Parekh is in Calgary for 82 games and sticks with that team, which they're going to give him every opportunity to do, he's a player that, like, what, he needs to go back and have 100 points in the OHL for a third time, right? Like, he's in a tricky spot now. I think because he got that men's worlds experience, because he looked really good and scored in his only NHL game last year, that people are starting to think about Zane in a bit of a different way in terms of whether he's ready. I think he's going to surprise some people and have a much better camp this year than he had a year ago. He struggled in camp last year with the Flames. And there's also an opportunity on that Flames roster to make it, and not just make it, but to be their PP1 QB. And you have to put up points to win the Calder. That's just the way it is. So Zane's kind of my sneaky one. We can't bet at the Athletic or the New York Times. It's against the rules. We can't place bets. But if I were a betting man, I would put some money on Zane. He's probably decent odds right now. And I think he's just so talented offensively that if he's running that power play and he gets 40 or 50 points this year, that might be enough to do it. And we've seen that was kind of the sweet spot for Moritz Seider, for Brock Faber, right? Like, you got to, as a defenseman, I think you got to get to 40 points to be in the Calder conversation. And maybe Calder voting shouldn't be decided that way, but that is ultimately how a lot of voters vote. So 40 points for a defenseman has kind of always been the barometer. And I think if this class just doesn't have that 60-point forward, Demidov is obviously the betting favorite, I think. If Demidov's playing in the top 6, I think he's got a chance to get to 50 or 60 points, which is kind of the barometer for forwards. But But I think there's also a scenario where Demidov's playing with Alex Newhook on the third line, right? Like
Mhm.
they've kind of got some wingers, and Zach Bolduc might take a little bit of opportunity for him now that Zach Bolduc's there, and it's just Demidov's the I mean he's the player to watch in the league this year, I think. Or among the players to watch. I actually think between him and Lane Hudson that they might have two of the 10 most compelling players to watch in the entire NHL this season. Um, but I still think Zane's kind of a sneaky one because he could take over that power play, and I don't think Braden Paschal or some of the depth defensemen that they have are really going to stand in his way from starting the year there. So if he starts the year there and he's on the PP to start, and let's say they give him that 9 game stint, he's got 4 or 5 points through 9 games. Suddenly, I think Zane's in the conversation to win the Calder from that point on because if he's on your roster, he's running your first power play.
That is awesome, and definitely going to post the odds during the video when I post it just to see. Because that's really interesting, honestly. Zane Parekh pick. So you've been so generous with your time. I do want to end the episode with what was your favorite memory of all time being in this space?
Oh man, it's got to be a game, and I've been to some of the all-time great international hockey games that have been played. Uh, I mean, the Bedard game in Halifax against Slovakia in the quarterfinals was pretty special. Like he won them that game, and if not for winning them that game and that play he made in overtime, obviously, they would have been bounced in the quarterfinal, and they that would be 3 straight years because obviously they've lost the last 2 years. That Halifax was 3 years ago. People forget. They obviously went on to win gold in that tournament, but that would have been 3 straight quarterfinal exits, and we would be talking about a crisis in Hockey Canada if Bedard doesn't just go Super Saiyan in that event. That event was it wasn't just that game either. Connor Bedard was the story of that tournament every single day. It was sort of a what is he going to do today to what record is he now chasing today in terms of tournament points record and most points in a game, and like he just it was a hat trick every other game, and he was just it was unbelievable, right? And that's hard to do. I've watched Gavin McKenna now do that only once. The only time I've ever seen Gavin McKenna truly go sort of berserk and
Mm.
sort of make it look easy in the way that Connor Bedard made scoring goals at that level look easy was another one of the best games I've ever been to, which was in Finland 2 years ago at U18 Worlds when Trevor Connolly delivered that check from behind, got a 5 minute major. The game looked sealed for the Americans. The Americans were up by 3 goals when Connolly delivered that hit, and then obviously Gavin McKenna scores a hat trick, and Canada scores 3 goals on the 5 minute major and comes from behind in the third period to win that gold medal game. But the U18 Worlds, and I've been to some great U18 Worlds games. The Americans getting upset by the Swedes, some of the rivalry games that have been played at U18 Worlds over the years have been great. I saw William Dufour score 4 goals at the Memorial Cup in St. John. That was an unbelievable game. Dufour just took over that tournament and won the St. John Sea Dogs, who were eliminated in the first round of the QMJHL playoffs that year, and then won the Memorial Cup with Gardner McDougall after they fired their head coach ahead of the Memorial Cup, won the Memorial Cup with Gardner McDougall and obviously William Dufour with a 4 goal game. So those moments come to mind, but I was saving. I saw Akil Thomas's golden goal was unbelievable in Ostrava at the World Juniors in the Czech Republic. That was right before the pandemic hit. COVID was actually running rampant in the world. None of us just knew it at that time. But that was like 2 months before the world shut down. That Akil Thomas golden goal. Teddy Stiga last year,
Yep.
first shot of the tournament for Teddy Stiga, the golden goal last year. The fight at the end of the year prior in Gothenburg, people forget the fight with Lane Hudson and Ryan Leonard and Jonathan Lekkerimäki right at the buzzer of the gold medal game between Sweden and USA. So I've been lucky to be in the building for some pretty amazing games. But the single most unbelievable moment I've ever been in the building for was Mason McTavish pulling the puck off the goal line at the Summer World Juniors in Edmonton in that gold medal game against Finland, and then Kent
Yep.
Johnson and Logan Stankoven going the other way and scoring. That tournament was a complete failure. Nobody was at those. They gave that Summer World Juniors to them after obviously the pandemic tournament had been canceled. And that was their opportunity to make some money. Nobody attended the games, even the gold medal game, the upper bowl at the Rogers Arena in Edmonton was curtained off, so the lower bowl was full, and there was probably about 10,000 people there, and it was packed, and it was extremely loud, and the gold medal game was a huge success. But that game was that summer tournament. Nobody in Edmonton cared about it, and still it created one of the best moments in the history of the tournament, which was that Mason McTavish save against Finland in overtime to pull that puck off of the goal line. That was unbelievable. Like, that was a moment where everybody in the press box stood up because they thought that the Finns had scored, and the odds of that puck staying out of the net after McTavish batted it out of the air were near zero, right? So that was probably the craziest moment I've ever been in the building for. And I remember going to the airport the next day and running into Kent Johnson and his mom, and everybody was, at that point, everybody had seen it. It had gone viral, and everybody at the Edmonton airport was stopping Kent and his mom. And it was just sort of a reminder that even in this shitty summer tournament, that the World Juniors can just create these sort of postcards, right? Like Jordan Eberle and Mason McTavish and Connor Bedard, just these moments in time that just stick with us. And just because they're kids, I think just the feeling when they win is different than it is when NHLers win an Olympic gold medal or that kind of a thing, or the Stanley Cup. I truly just believe that because they're kids, and the ebbs and flows in those games and the way that they collapse all the time and blow leads all the time, and the World Juniors just has this bit of a different magic to it that way. And those moments, it seems like every year we get a McTavish moment or a Bedard moment, or the gold medal game always seems to go to overtime. And so those are my best memories. I think the World Junior, even though I've seen Memorial Cups and Frozen Fours, and I've covered the Stanley Cup playoffs and that kind of a thing, all of my fondest memories seem to be the World Juniors. But that McTavish one was just bonkers.
I think it was either Chris Peters or Stephen Ellis that also agreed with you. I'm not sure if either one was in the press box, but they came back to Mason McTavish saving the puck on the goal line. And I wanted to go back to when Teddy Stiga scored the game-winning goal, or the gold-winning goal. I remember I had to look back, but James Haggins had an opportunity to bury the puck. He just needed to lift the puck a little bit more, and I think it would have changed his draft season. I think he would have been top five if he would have scored that puck, because that would have gave him his draft year moment. He was so close. He just needed to lift the puck a little bit more. And
James Hagen
um,
scored a nice wraparound. People forget too. James Hagen scored a huge wraparound goal in that gold medal game.
Yeah, yeah. I actually clipped that and then he also did like a very similar thing at Boston in I think it was the first playoff game where he scored. He was a very clutch player. He just needed to lift it a little more. And also, to your point with the Connor Bedard one, Adam Guyan, who is now a Blackhawks prospect,
Yeah,
he was standing on his head during that game.
yeah.
I
So was
cannot
Thomas
imagine.
Milic. Thomas Milic made a before Bedard scored that goal in overtime. The best chance in that overtime was actually Slovakia to close that game out, and Thomas Milic literally dove across the crease to make a diving save. So we all talk about Bedard saving the day there, but Thomas Milic was phenomenal. He's obviously a Winnipeg Jets prospect now. Thomas Milic was phenomenal in that tournament too, and Guyan as well. That year was a pretty unique one for Guyan. Just came out of nowhere in the NAHL. He was really good in the USHL, and just so athletic that people fell in love with the athleticism. And obviously, it's been a really tough go for him in college and since then, and even in his post-draft season in the USHL. But Guyan was lights out at certain points in that draft year and got scouts excited about him. So I know if he doesn't pan out, that people will probably give the Blackhawks a hard time for using a high second round pick on him. But there were other scouts that were really sort of in love with Guyan and the athleticism that he has.
And I think he was passed over the year prior. And I think the only thing that the scouts were mad about the Blackhawks was not taking Andrew Cristall, who was like everybody kind of knew was Bedard's best friend, so they kind of wanted to bring him there. But I want to
There were some
thank you.
pretty good goalies in that class too. Trey Augustine
Yeah,
is obviously a stud,
Jacob
and
Fowler,
Jacob Fowler, and yeah, so Michael
Harabel.
Harabel, yeah.
That was a very decent goalie draft. But and Gavin Brindley, I think, fell in that class too. But I think he was picked up before the 35th pick. to the Columbus Blue Jackets. But I want to thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. I could talk to you for hours, but we passed an hour, so I want to let you go because I know you're very, very busy. But this is your like Hot Ones time where there's a camera here, here, and here. Tell everybody what you're working on and what you got coming out.
The big one is that I'm working on right now, which I mentioned sort of a couple of times throughout, is prospect tiers. It's a pretty unique thing. I do my own U23 prospects ranking twice a year. Obviously, winter and summer, I do it every year. But the prospect tiers is a new project that we started last year, and it's again, it's less my list and more I just let scouts sort of move guys. I build the initial buckets and put guys into little groupings together, and then I let scouts tell me who to move up and down. And I think it's a really fascinating exercise, and it results in a much different list than the list that you see in the public sphere of these kids. So I'm excited for that to come out. That comes out, I think, the second week in September. So I'm really looking forward to sort of having that out. And then from there, I'll be at rookie tournament, and I'm going to the Buffalo rookie tournament. And then for right from that, we're right into trips. I'm doing a couple of, I won't spoil with who, but I'm doing a couple of really cool behind the scenes sort of embeds with different OHL and college hockey teams this year. I love doing that type of journalism, sort of embedding with the team and being a part of it with them. So I've got some really fun stories that way coming this year. And then before we know it, we'll be in Minneapolis for the World Juniors and all of that. And I'll be out in Calgary and Lethbridge this fall for the CHL USA Prospects Challenge in its second year. And we'll see Ryan Lin and Carson Carrolls and Mathis Preston and all those guys will be a part of that, obviously. So I'm looking forward to that. And on the American side, you'll have the NTDP guys mostly, which is a bit of a weaker year, but I'm hoping that they'll include guys like Jack Hextall and some of the USHL guys in that this year. So yeah, it should be a fun year.
Yeah, I was gonna ask like what your favorite like tournament or event is for prospects in the entire year. Is it like World Juniors?
Yeah, it's the World Juniors. The Frozen Four is great. The Memorial Cup's great. U18 Worlds is great. World Junior Summer Showcase, all the big prospects games, the Chipotle All-American game, and OHL top. Obviously now with the CHL going away from the CHL top prospects game into this CHL USA Prospects Challenge, it's been nice that the OHL and the QMJHL have now started their own top prospects game, which I think is good for them. And the OHL top prospects game will be in Peterborough this year at one of my favorite junior rinks, the PMC. So with its square, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's got square. Literally, the boards in the corner are practically square. It's unbelievable. Wow. Pretty unique rink. So yeah, there's lots of good events throughout the year. Lots of events that I enjoy, and I always do a couple college trips every year and that kind of a thing as well to see the college kids at more than just the Frozen Four. But and I love college hockey, but nothing tops the World Juniors. It's the best, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. All your links that you do are going to be in the description. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe, and definitely follow Scott Wheeler at X and check out some of his stuff because it's absolutely awesome. Thank you guys so much.